the Greens have a list of demands and they amount to a $500 billion hit on big business, and it's only getting started. If Labor was to form a minority government at the next election and capitulate to such demands. Joining me now is the Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume. Jane, with this list of demands, I feel like the Greens would only be getting started, and then you have on the other side the Teals saying no new gas. So the next election is looking pretty terrifying.
Laura, I think the cat has been well and truly belled on this one. You can already see a Labor government beginning to panic. And they're panicking, you can tell that they're panicking because they're attacking Peter Dutton, playing the man and not the ball. They're starting scare campaigns and essentially they've taken their eye off the ball of what's really important, which is bringing down the cost of living, the number one issue for all Australians right now. If the Greens were put behind the Treasury benches, you could only imagine what would occur. And they'll be ably assisted by the Teals. The most important thing we can do at the next election is make sure that we don't fall into a minority government and instead elect a party that actually has a sensible, fiscally responsible economic plan to tackle inflation, to bring down taxes, to raise the standard of living and bring down the cost of living.
So, Jane, you're saying if the coalition can't win outright, you want Labor to win outright. That's the next best outcome in your view.
I think that Australia do not need, cannot afford to have a minority government. But quite frankly, Labor haven't exactly been the exemplar of good economic management. We've seen them spend an additional $315 billion. We know that public spending continues to push up inflation. We have some of the most persistent inflation in all advanced economies around the world. They've taken their eye off the ball and failed to tackle the most important issue, which is the cost of living. And instead, they're distracted by just about anything else, including their electoral prospects.
Well, looking at these university caps as well, which the coalition, I might say, has a similar policy of its own, perhaps it would go even further. That is going to do nothing to help the cost of living, is it?
Well, that's not true. In fact, we know that this incredibly high migration, the fact that the immigration program in Australia has managed to get away from Labor and got out of
international
control,
students
is one of the reasons why building costs are so high. Well, there's 500,000 international students that are moving into the private rental market. You can't say that with 500,000 new entrants into the private rental market that's not pushing up rents even further. We do want to see caps on international students. However, we believe that negotiating individually with each university, depending on their individual needs, depending on the region, depending on their business model, is the way to go, rather than having a blanket formula that applies to everybody.
I mean, in South Australia, for example, they have a 10% vacancy rate in the student accommodation market. They have these caps as well. That doesn't make sense.
Which is why it's so important to speak to the individual universities and work out what it is that's most appropriate for them. But student caps are a way to go about this, and they are pushing up private rents. There is no doubt about it. We want to make sure that we can bring down rents,
the evidence
but in a
of that,
sustainable
Jane,
way.
To be fair, because in Sydney and Melbourne, the renting crisis is starting to moderate, and there hasn't been a dramatic reduction in international students in that time.
Well, you don't need to look very far, Laura. Even I myself was standing in a queue for a rental property with my university-aged son not that long ago at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning in the rain. There would have been 40 to 50 groups of people, not people, groups of people in line to look at one pretty ordinary looking rental property.
But were they
there is a rental
students?
crisis in Australia. There is no doubt about it now. Some of them absolutely were international students. There is no doubt about it that we're in a rental crisis right now. Obviously, we want to make sure that we can add to the building stock through building supply. There's much more work that needs to be done in that space. But in the meantime, a reduction that is targeted specifically to the area, specifically to the university, in international student caps is an appropriate way to go.